One of the potential limitations of these smaller inverter style generators that people are generally carting around is their relatively small fuel tank. But there is a bit of a hack or a workaround to get around that. So these smaller generators, somewhere around about the 2 kilowatt mark, your 2.2, 2.4 kilowatt generators at full tilt will gobble up about 1 litre per hour. And all of them have a relatively small tank, and they've got a run time of somewhere between just under 4 hours to just over 4 hours. And if you've got a job that you want done, or you want to supply power for longer than 4 hours, you've got to turn it off, fill it up. Technically you should be letting it cool down, fill it up and then restart it. And sometimes if you're running your air conditioner or your heater or something like that, and you don't want to interrupt that power supply, then the other option is to fill it when it's running, and that's a bit of a no-no for quite obvious reasons. So what you can do, all of these taps on the top of these generators or these types of machines have an air bleed tap in the top of them to turn the air on and off. And if you've got one of these machines and you've ever started it and forgotten to open up that air bleed, you'll know it, because it'll only run for about maybe 15 or 20 minutes or something like that, and then it will stop because it'll create a vacuum in there and it won't allow the fuel to pull through. So you can utilise its ability to seal by finding yourself or buying an accessory cap, pulling out the air tap off the top of it and attaching some sort of fitting. In my case, it's just a screw-in brass bayonet fitting. And so what we do is we just we take the factory cap off, put this modified cap on. Now once that's screwed on and screwed on snug, that's now airtight, that cap. So if we put this hose onto the bayonet, what we're going to do is, as the fuel is running out of the generator's tank, it's going to create a vacuum at this end of the pipe. And if we drop that into a fuel container, it will draw fuel from that container up the pipe and drop it into the tank. So you can either do that when it's full or when it's nearly empty. Better if it's full, because what will happen then is it will use the fuel from the auxiliary fuel area first. And then once it starts to pull air in, it'll then start using the fuel in the tank. So initially it'll start using the fuel in the tank, but once it creates a vacuum, it'll start pulling that fuel out of the auxiliary tank. Now that auxiliary tank doesn't need to be sealed, it can be open. As long as that pipe stays underneath the level of the fuel, it'll start pulling that fuel through. So what I'll do is I'll crank it up, and I'll put a clear hose on here and a small clear container with some fuel in it, and we'll see how it works. Alright, it's all set up and ready to go. I've just jammed the fuel hose into the end of this clear hose, so we'll be able to see that fuel lifting up through the clear hose here. That's the fuel level now, and it's all sealed up and set up ready to go. So I just stick this thing in there just so the fuel bucket doesn't, or this cordial bottle doesn't tip over, and we'll see how that goes. Alright, the generator's been running for just under an hour, so I've turned it off, and so I'll get rid of that thing. I had to tie it in because the vibration was lifting that out of the bucket, but anyway, that's probably neither here nor there. So that's where the fuel started off, and that's where it's ended up after an hour. So it took a little while to draw that fuel through the pipe, which is what that vacuum does with that sealed cap. So it's drawn out, that's a litre bottle, so it's drawn out, I don't know, maybe a couple of 100 mil. But once it started pulling that fuel up, it took a little while to start, but then once it started pulling it up, it was pretty consistent. So if we were to take this pipe out of here and shove it into the top of that 10 litre drum, my generator's running at about 1 litre an hour, which is pretty typical of most of the generators at this size. So the generator itself is going to give me around about 3.5, a little bit more than 3.5 hours on one tank, and this drum here will give me 10 litres. So with a full tank in the generator and a full 10 litre jerry can, that's going to give me around about 13 or 14 hours of constant use without having to top that thing up. So just something to bear in mind. It can be done. It's pretty simple and it's pretty cheap. You just got to find yourself one of these, like a spare part cap, off the same type of generator obviously, and yeah, you're good to go.